Hello again, fourth grade, and welcome to lesson 2 of chapter 2. In this lesson, we're going to focus on why did revolutionary ideas prosper in the Northeast. You're going to use your investigative skills to explore why new ideas prospered in the Northeast. Reading and talking about the history of the Northeast will help you learn how this area became known as the cradle of liberty. You'll be able to explain how the revolution against Great Britain started in the Northeast. Let's go ahead and jump into our lesson. So open up to page 68 and 69 in your workbooks, and we're going to begin reading the section titled The Mayflower Compact. Read the title. What do you think the Mayflower Compact is about? Circle any words you don't know. Underline clues in the primary source that help you answer the questions. When was the Mayflower Compact written? When did they arrive in North America, and where is Plymouth? So you're going to be underlining in this yellow section under where it says primary source. Read what the purpose of the Mayflower, read to find out what the purpose of the Mayflower Compact was, and then underline words in the primary source that, that are about rules and government. The Mayflower Compact. In the 1600s, people who lived in England had to worship in the Church of England. If they didn't, they could be fined or imprisoned. The Pilgrims were a group of people who didn't agree with all the teachings of the Church of England. They wanted to practice their own religion and live in their own community. However, they couldn't do this in England. In 1608, the Pilgrims went to live in Holland. Then in 1620, 100 people, including about 60 pilgrims, set sail from England to North America on a ship called the Mayflower. Before the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts, leaders on the ship gathered to write the Mayflower Compact. Its purpose was to form a government and agree to follow any rules that the group adopted. They did this for the good of the colony in hopes that working together would help the colony succeed. The compact was signed by nearly all of the adult men on the ship. Although women were not part of creating the rules and did not sign the compact, all members of the colony were required to follow the agreement. The Pilgrims elected a governor to run this government. This idea of self-government was an important idea for the formation of the North American colonies. Pilgrims on the Mayflower wrote down the rules of their new community in an agreement called the Mayflower Compact. In their words, the Mayflower Compact, 1620, we enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, and constitutions and offices, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience, in witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord, King James of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland, the 54th, Anno Domini, 1620. So go ahead and underline those sections out of this yellow primary source section. When was the Mayflower Compact written? So we know that it was written in 1620 on the 11th of November. When did they arrive in North America? And where is Plymouth? So you can go ahead and underline those sections. Make sure you circled any words that were unfamiliar, any words that you didn't know. Then we're going to go on and take a look at our main idea and key details section on the following page. To identify the main idea and key details, read the section of text. Think about what the section or text is mostly about. Write down what you think the main idea is. Reread the text. Search for key details that support the main idea. Write the supporting details next to the main idea. If you cannot find details that support your main idea, rethink the main idea. Then reread the text and look for key details to support the main idea. So based on what we read, they gave us a main idea and we have to find 3 key details that support it. So the main idea they gave us was that The Pilgrims came to North America to have more freedom. Now we can think about details that were related to that. We know that the Pilgrims left England because they were not free to practice their own religions. That's one of the key details we read about. We know they came to North America to be able to practice their own religious beliefs in an area where they were allowed to do that. And we know that they signed the Mayflower Compact and agreed to follow the rules that the group wrote down. Now for the following page, we are going to read page 74 to 83 in our research companion. That's our textbook. We're going to use our skills to find text evidence that tells us the main idea and key details of different parts of this text. So the first main idea they gave us was the economies of the New England colonies and the middle colonies were different. So we have to find 3 details that talk about the differences between the economies. We're also going to have 2 additional main ideas that we're going to look for, and I'm going to give you those main ideas to help guide you towards finding the supporting details. So the next main idea we're going to talk about was that America won its independence from Britain after the Revolutionary War. We're going to add 3 details about that. And then the last main idea we're going to focus on is that the United States formed a new government after the Revolutionary War. We'll find 3 additional details to support us with that main idea as well. Let's go ahead and jump into our textbook. And we're going to read, why did revolutionary ideas prosper in the Northeast? In 1620, a group of Puritans called the Pilgrims arrived near present-day Plymouth, Massachusetts, to establish a colony. They had come to North America from England. They wanted to practice their religion as they wanted. In England, this was against the law, so they made the long journey to North America. So basically what we're reading in this paragraph was one of the main reasons that these pilgrims decided to leave England was that they didn't want to follow the church. They had different religious beliefs, and because they weren't allowed to practice their own beliefs there, they decided to leave and go somewhere where they could practice their own beliefs. In the first year in Plymouth, the Pilgrims struggled to survive. They received help from the Native Americans. Native Americans had lived in North America for about 10,000 years before the European settlers arrived. The Native Americans taught the Pilgrims how to plant crops, including corn. In the fall of 1621, the European settlers shared a feast of their crops with the Native Americans. They did this to show thanks to the Native Americans for helping them survive. Today, the remembrance of this celebration is called Thanksgiving. Some other European groups began to settle in the area near Plymouth. The region was named New England because most of the early colonists were from England. People who came for religious freedom for themselves did not always tolerate the religious beliefs of other people. Then, a Quaker named William Penn had a revolutionary idea. He established the colony of Pennsylvania as a place that welcomed all people and gave them the freedom to practice their own religions. So let's take a look at the different captions and timelines that we have on this page. The caption says the Pilgrims struggled to survive the first year in colonies. They built houses and farms like this one. So you can see the photo of the house. You can see even their fence posts. Everything looks like they were really struggling to put it together. Our timeline at the top shows that in 1620, Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth. In 1644, William Penn was born. In 1675, King Philip's War began. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, and in 1787, the US Constitution was signed. Colonial growth. As most European settlers came, settlements grew into colonies. Colonies developed their own economies based on their strengths. Trading was very important, both within the colonies and with other countries. One key to successful trading was establishing a shop near the ocean or a major river. The waterways of the Northeast made it easier to transport goods. Towns, including Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, began to build up along the major waterways. The shipbuilding industry boomed in New England colonies. Massachusetts was ideal for shipbuilding. It had many deep rivers and miles of shoreline along the ocean. These waterways were also close to forests, which meant easy access to wood that could be used to build ships. Shipbuilding provided many jobs for people in Massachusetts and helped the economy grow. The inland parts of New York and Pennsylvania had better soil than the New England colonies. As a result, people living in the middle colonies relied more on agriculture or growing crops. They farmed crops such as wheat, corn, barley, and rye. The middle colonies became known as the breadbasket colonies because much of the grain grown there was used to make bread for all of the colonies. Wheat was one of the main crops of the middle colonies. Colonists had to make their own supplies. Blacksmiths shaped metal into tools and other goods. Effects on Native Americans. One conflict between Native Americans and colonists was King Philip's War in New England. King Philip was the name of the English settlers gave to the Wampanoag leader, Metacomet. At first, Metacomet had a friendly and close relationship with the settlers, but after a few Puritans executed 3 Wampanoag warriors, he led his people to fight them. Metacomet and thousands of Native Americans died in this war. In contrast, some European settlers, like William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, valued cooperation with Native Americans. Penn is also said to have met with Lenni Lenape in Pennsylvania and exchanged promises of friendship. The Iroquois Confederacy, formed by Onondaga chief Hiawatha, was a group of 5 nations that lived in part of New York and northern Pennsylvania. Benjamin Franklin admired the nations working together peacefully. He thought the colonies could work together in a similar way. Primary source, in their words, William Penn. And the king of the country where I live hath given unto me a great province therein, but I desire to enjoy it with your love and consent. And this was a letter that he had written to the Native Americans in 1681. Unrest and protest. In the early years, the relationship between the American colonies and England had many benefits. The colonies imported goods they needed from England and exported raw materials to England. Because they were part of England, the colonies were subject to rules and taxes. At first, most colonists accepted this. As time went on, however, England placed more and more rules and taxes on the colonists. Some colonists became frustrated and angry. From 1756 to 1763, England fought the French and Indian War. Part of the war took place in North America. England won the war, but at a great cost. They raised taxes on the colonists. Some colonists began to protest or object to higher taxes, especially in Massachusetts. To control the protests, England sent more soldiers to Boston. Protesters and the soldiers got into an argument. In the confusion, the British soldiers began firing their rifles and killed several protesters. This incident, known as the Boston Massacre, further angered the colonists. In another protest, colonists dumped 342 chests of imported British tea into the harbor. This protest against the tax on tea was called the Boston Tea Party. The colonists also protested not having a say in how they were being taxed. So the colonists were very upset because anytime something was happening, anytime more funds were needed, whether it was for a war effort or anything else, England placed higher and higher taxes on the colonists, and they didn't give them a say in any of the way that they were being ruled. And that's what began all of this unrest, was that as they began protesting and saying, we don't want to pay these higher taxes and follow these very strict rules that are being placed on us, England sent soldiers over to the colonies And that led to the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, where there was all of this unrest due to these higher taxes and these regulations that were being placed on the people. Revolution. In Massachusetts, Minutemen were ready to assemble at a moment's notice to protect their towns. Their fathers and grandfathers also had been trained as Minutemen. On the evening of April 18th, 1775, British soldiers began to move out of Boston. Patriots Paul Revere and William Dawes rode their horses into Lexington to warn the Minutemen that the British soldiers were coming. The first battles of the American Revolution were fought near the towns of Lexington and Concord. The war continued for more than 7 years. In 1783, Great Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. Minutemen were prepared to defend their towns with only a very short warning, and that's where they got their name. Biography. Abigail Adams was the wife of founder and future President John Adams. While John Adams was away, Abigail Adams wrote him many letters giving him advice. She asked her husband to remember women's rights as he helped create the new government. Field trip. Revolutionary heroes and sites. Many important monuments of the American Revolution, moments of the American Revolution happened in the Northeast. Today, learn about key events and leaders in the revolution by visiting sites across the region. Saratoga, New York. Explore the battlefields where the Americans took possession of much-needed cannons and artillery from the British Army. Boston, Massachusetts. Follow the Freedom Trail to visit famous locations, including the Old North Church, Paul Revere's house, and the Bunker Hill Monument. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Imagine the American soldiers spending a brutal winter of 1777 in this army camp. Then take a tour of General Washington's headquarters. Trenton, New Jersey. General George Washington famously crossed the frozen Delaware River here on December 25th, 1776. The next morning, his troops caught the enemy soldiers by surprise and won the Battle of Trenton. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. Don't forget to take a close look at the Liberty Bell. Washington, D.C. Of all the monuments in our nation's capital, make sure to see the Jefferson Memorial, which honors the writer of the Declaration of Independence. A new nation begins. Before the Revolution, colonists felt that Great Britain held too much power over the people. When forming the government for the new nation, the founders did not want to give the government too much power. As a result, they wrote the Articles of Confederation as a system of government, which served the United States from 1781 to 1789. It gave a lot of power and freedom to individual states. However, this led to problems. The central government was very weak. It could not raise money through taxes, nor could it regulate trade between the states. People in the new nation were also struggling. Farmers struggled to pay their debts and taxes. Many faced losing their farms. In response, farmers began to protest in Massachusetts. A series of protests led by Daniel Shays became known as Shays' Rebellion. In 1786, about 1,200 armed rebels tried to capture the government weapons. This event, along with other problems, helped convince leaders that a new, better system of government was needed. A new form of government was established by the Constitution, signed on September 17, 1787. The new government began operating under the rules of the Constitution on March 4, 1789. The Constitution gave more power to the central government, but it divided the power among different branches. The states also kept certain powers under the Constitution. George Washington was elected the first president of the United States under the Constitution. Washington chose 4 people to serve as his cabinet. These people were close advisors to the president. Even though it is not written anywhere that a president needs to have a cabinet, all presidents since Washington have done so. The Constitution required a permanent capital. It called for the creation of a federal city. Maryland and Virginia gave up land so Washington, D.C. could be formed. This unique city is not part of any state. The Capitol building was built at the center of the city. Did you know 9 different cities have served as the capital of the United States? During the Revolution, both the First and Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, starting in 1774. At times, the city was under threat, so Congress also met in Baltimore, Lancaster, and York. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress met in Philadelphia, Princeton, Annapolis, Trenton, and New York City. After writing the Constitution, Congress met in New York City, Philadelphia, and finally in Washington, D.C. That takes us to the end of our reading for this section. Now we're going to go back onto page 71, and we're going to keep referencing back into our textbook to fill in our details. So for our first section, the economies of New England, the New England colonies and middle colonies were different. So we're going to write about what makes them different, where their location was, how it affected the kind of things they did to earn money, if they participated in any trade with different countries or groups. All of those details will go here. The second main idea, like we talked about, was the America won its independence from Britain after the Revolutionary War. So we can talk about what led up to the war, the different protests, the treatment, where fighting started, and when the United States was recognized. And our last section, the main idea was the United States formed a new government after the Revolutionary War. We can talk about what document was written that they utilized in the beginning, what they did afterwards when they realized that maybe it wasn't enough or it wasn't clear enough or provided a central government. And then once the government was formed, what the document was called and which leader was placed as our first president. Once you've completed those sections, we're going to go on to the next page. Now, for page 72, we do have 2 questions that we're going to answer on this page. The first question asks, what is a protest? So give details and an example from your reading to answer what is a protest. Remember to use complete sentences and pull part of the question into your answer. So if the question says, what is a protest? You're going to say a protest is, and then you're going to give your definition and your example. In the bottom where it says write and cite evidence, how can protests spark change? Use facts from the text to explain your response. So again, pull from the question into your answer. A protest can spark change by, and then you're going to give me your response there. Remember to use examples from the reading, from your textbook, to support your answer. On page 73, under Pull It Together, it says, how did the events of the Revolutionary era make the Northeast a key location for people both in the past and the present, or for in the past and today? So you can write about the Revolutionary era and how it led to the Constitution and forming the United States. You could write about how the capital city was formed, and how all of those things led to where the country is today. Again, remember to use your complete sentences. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.